Hey there, chummers, and welcome to another Shadowrun review. I know I didn't do one of these last week, but last week was kind of a rough week with a lot going on, so I didn't get anything done. But we have a new review for this week, and today we're going to look back to 3rd edition Shadowrun and talk about the Shadowrun Companion. Now, this was probably my first sourcebook purchase for Shadowrun when I was a kid. I don't know, maybe. If I can remember that sort of thing correctly. And what the Shadowrun Companion is it is essentially the core character rulebook for 3rd edition. So you have your 3rd edition core book, which has all the basic rules that you need to make a character, run a game, and that sort of thing. And then you have the Shadowrun Companion, which gives you more stuff. It gives you more rules for things like character creation, contacts. This is also the book that introduced edges and flaws into Shadowrun 3rd edition, and new character types as well. So the book itself is set up typical to Shadowrun 3rd edition books. You know, you have your table of contents, you have everything broken down. You have the techno matrix style format, that art style that was kind of that midway point between the Matrix and 80s cyberpunk feel and that sort of thing. And this was a pretty good book. I do have the physical copy of this book. I didn't feel like setting up my camera to actually do this review. So yeah, there's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight in this book. And the first thing that I wanted to highlight, number one, it's got some advice on creating characters, right off the bat. So it goes into a discussion of, well, what type of character do you want to play? You know, what's your character's archetype, but how do you go beyond that sort of thing, and so on and so forth. And it was actually a pretty good little bit of advice back in the day, especially to a fairly new player or a new GM or something like that. It also gives you different questions to ask. It basically talks about how to play 20 questions with character creation in order to flesh out your character more. And then it also introduced a building point character design system. Now, previously, Shadowrun had been priority based. So you have priority A, B, C, D, and E. Priority A usually gave you the most stuff or magical abilities. If I remember correctly, priority A made you a full-fledged magician. Priority B would be if you wanted to do like a physical adept and that sort of thing. And then you got C, D, and E. And the idea was that you would assign a priority to each category. So if you assign priority A to magic, you'd be a full magician. If you assign priority B to attributes, you'd get a fair amount of attribute points. The races were under C, D, and E. E was baseline human. D was, I think, orc and dwarf, maybe, and then C was like elf and troll and that sort of thing. So, but it introduced the building point system, which actually the building point system in Shadowrun 3rd edition, not a whole lot different from 4th edition. You get fewer points with it, but it generally works pretty much the same way. And it talked about how to do that. The edges and flaws were pretty cool. This was actually something that it worked better with the point design system, but you could also use it with the priority system. I think if you used it with the priority system, you got like 20 points to spend in edges and flaws. I don't know if that was an actual official rule or if that's just a house rule that I came up with to get more interesting characters. I really don't know, but we'll go with that. So the different edges and flaws, you had the standard edges and flaws that you find in Shadowrun today. You got your attribute edges and flaws, your skills edges and flaws, physical edges and flaws, and so on and so forth, social edges and flaws. And this was really just a way to make a more well-rounded character. Point of pro tip, by the way, Sea Madness, not a good one to take. when you're running a Cyber Pirates campaign. I actually had somebody in one of my Cyber Pirates games who took Sea Madness, and it basically made his character all but unplayable. Yeah. So, just a little note there. And then if you scroll through the edges, you go through the edges and flaws and all that good stuff, it actually gives you some new character types. And this is where it kind of, you could start to play with different sentient beings a little bit. Now, it didn't have, the full gamut of character types that 4th edition introduced, so you didn't have, sentient creature, well, you kind of did, but you didn't have, Nagas or Sasquatch or, free spirits or changelings or drakes and that sort of thing. It basically boiled down to you could play a ghoul, a ghoul was a workable character. If I remember correctly, if you were using the priority system, it was very, very hard to create a ghoul character that was halfway decent. If I remember correctly, it took 2 priority slots in order to create a ghoul. And then you had an infection table that you had to roll off of that determined basically your social characteristics and that sort of thing. And you would roll on this infection table, and if you got 0 successes, you would have right off you'd have a -2 to intelligence and charisma. That was it was tough to create a ghoul character, but you could do it, and they did have some pretty decent abilities with them as well. And a little bit of an interesting thing, because at this time in Shadowrun, ghouls were very much not treated well at all. This was around the time of the containment zone, just after the containment zone, I think, if I remember the timeline correctly, in Chicago, just after the Cabrini Refuge was destroyed and killed off, and ghouls just in general at this time did not have a very fun time of things. The other character option that you had was a shapeshifter. That's right, it was shapeshifter that needed 2 priorities. So if you wanted to play a shapeshifter in Shadowrun, you had a couple of options. You had bear, eagle, fox, leopard, seal, tiger, and wolf. If you wanted to play a shapeshifter and you use the priority system, see right here, it says we recommend using the point-based design system for creating shapeshifter characters. That's because if you're using the priority system, it takes 2 priorities to create a shapeshifter. So you have to have priority C to race and priority A to resources. Otherwise, if you want to be a shapeshifter full magician, it would be priority B assigned to resources. And then you assign them normally. And I believe, if I remember character creation, you had to split your points in between your animal form and your human form. So it was really, really tough to make a shapeshifter using the priority system. Doable. I did it many, many times, but it was kind of tough. What ended up happening is a lot of times you ended up with some pretty low human stats, but your animal stats were fairly decent, especially if you were like a bear or a wolf or something like that. And of course, you got the regeneration, which is always nice. Essentially, it makes you almost unkillable. If you reached deadly on your condition monitor, you rolled a d6, and on a d6, you didn't regenerate. Well, essentially, you regenerated just like a critter power. I should back up and talk about that a little bit. So you regenerated just like the critter power would. So you take damage, you regenerate it. If you hit deadly, you roll a d6. On a roll 1, you don't regenerate it, and you die normally. You follow the normal death rules at that point. You still suffered weapon penalties and that sort of thing. And you were really, really vulnerable to things like weapon foci and stuff like that. But you were almost unkillable a lot of times. So, yeah. And then it also introduced the metahuman variants, which were kind of fun, actually. A lot of these were regional based. So these would be like meta variants from different places in the world. Like the Cyclops would be, Greek and Mediterranean trolls, and that sort of thing. And some of these were fun to play around with. They really were, because a couple of them were kind of but some of them were pretty fun. The Satyr was a really weird one, that I never actually used, but kind of fun. Why not? Night Ones was another fun one. Very similar to what you find in 4th edition, that sort of thing. And then, of course, it had different optional rules for streamlining different things out of the core book, different rules for contacts and that sort of thing, and how to use them, and so on and so forth. It had this section right here that I was scrolling to. I want to back up. How to hire a Shadowrunner. This was essentially a leaked document from a corporation, a megacorp, that was passed around to their Johnsons, that basically was instructions on how you hire a Shadowrunner. They call it the Resources Adjustment Department, which is responsible for hiring specialized services, supplemental resources, Shadowrunners, and that sort of thing. And it was from Fucci, the Fucci Corporation, and this actually provided a pretty good look, good little snippet on how corporations hired Shadowrunners, how they viewed Shadowrunners, and that sort of thing. So it was a pretty cool little thing. Now, they also had rules for enemies and that sort of things, creating prime runners and that stuff. But what I really wanted to touch on in this book, because this video I think has probably gone on a bit long, let me kind of scroll further. No, running the game. Blah, 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 blah. Down we go. So the Shadowrun Companion actually introduced different campaign types. So, aside from the normal Shadowrun campaign, where, you're all corporate Shadowrunners, it had different campaign concepts that allowed you to explore different aspects of the Shadowrun universe. So, it had things like, if you want to play a Dockwagon high threat response team, you could do it. It had suggestions for character creation, adventure ideas, how to, do an entire campaign based around Dockwagon and that sort of thing. It also had options for running a media-focused campaign. So you're a team of reporters you're from a local Seattle news station like KSAF or something like that. How do you create those characters? What does an adventure focused on the media look like? What does a media campaign look like? And that sort of thing. And then there was another one, special forces, government special forces. Delta Force, SAS, that sort of thing. How do you play one of those campaigns? Very similar to a regular Shadowrun campaign. Very, very similar to something like that. Just more military focused than a normal campaign. You want to play as Lone Star Cops or Knight Errant or something like that. It's got a campaign option for doing that as well. A magic-focused campaign, not necessarily based around a magical group or something like that, but what if everybody in your group wants to play a magician? What does a campaign like that look like? What are some suggestions on some things that you could do? My favorite was the Ganger campaign, and this had rules for creating your gang. Essentially what it was is your runners weren't Shadowrunners, they were gangers, and they would create their own gang, and they would run the gang. They would try to essentially increase their territory and that sort of thing. And it had rules for character creation. Very, very low powered campaign, because you're street toughs. You're not well-trained Shadowrunners or anything like that. You're basically kids with basically the warriors that movie. That's essentially what you are at that point. And it was actually a pretty good. It was actually a pretty good premise, and it had all sorts of different adventure ideas, different campaigns, and that sort of thing. And it also had stuff for reputation and leadership. So what's your gang's reputation? How do you calculate that sort of thing, and so on and so forth. And it also had information on some of the more prominent gangs in Seattle, like the Halloweeners and the Spiders, and so on and so forth. So this was actually a pretty good section. I never actually used it, though. I think I had planned to at one point, and I never got around to it. So anyway, yeah, and then of course you had the character sheet, a bit of an expanded character sheet, one for regular characters, one for magicians, and that sort of thing. You had an index and so on and so forth. So definitely a very good investment for anyone looking to run Shadowrun 3rd Edition. Highly recommend picking it up if you've got it. You could probably find a physical copy of this book fairly easy on eBay. I don't think it would be too terribly expensive. I've never actually looked for it, but I don't think this is like a rare book or anything like that. And then of course Drive-Thru RPG, you can find the PDF for it there. You can purchase that PDF and download it there. So yeah, that is the Shadowrun Companion. Very cool little book. Definitely something that you should check out, even if you're just looking for some adventure ideas or some background on how corporations view Shadowrunners. It's a great little book. So anyway, I am going to go ahead and leave this video right here. Let me know what you think about this in the comments section below. Do you love this book? Do you hate it? Do you prefer? Have you run one of the different campaigns that this book suggests? Have you run a Dock Wagon campaign, or have you run a media-focused campaign? Let me know in the comments section below, and I will see you all next time. And that's the chip truth, chummers. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more Shadowrun content. Hit that notification bell so you will always know when I upload a brand new Shadowrun video, and until next time, remember to shoot straight and never, ever deal with a dragon.